Delhi has gone to this year?
I think it was two, 1.5, two, I guess. But this year has been decently okay. Last year it was terrible. It was very, very cold. And altogether this year we have not gone out. So that could also be one of the reasons.
Delhi has gone to.
Okay. So we are live now, sir. And it's a privilege and a pleasure to welcome you both and all the other guests who are joined in and others who are joining in. We are already streaming it live on YouTube. Uh, for this 13th edition of All That's Kerala, in the last 12 editions, what we have done, we have actually traveled across multiple places of Kerala. We have gone through multiple aspects of Kerala. And I have enjoyed this journey immensely well. Sitting in Delhi across multiple kind of seasons that we have crossed through, I have been able to experience Cochin just by sitting at home. And that too, I look forward to what we are going to create as a coffee table book out of these conversations, which is going to be a very interesting compendium encyclopedia of all that's Kerala. And that is all possible because of the meticulous planning and lovely work and bringing the best set of people, none other than Mr. MP Joseph, a renowned personality of Kerala. And of course, he is being loved across multiple parts of the country as well as the world, I must say. Himself a connoisseur of literature, loves food, loves to travel, loves to experience new things in life. That's what Mr. MP Joseph is to us. Today, in the memento that I gifted to him while he was here in Delhi to experience Banaras almost a year back, and that's the angocha, that's the gamcha that he's wearing right now, and that's how he carries the spirit of the country, and that's what Kerala is all about. Um, so, ladies and gentlemen, without much of ado, I would now like to request Mr. MP Joseph to invite and welcome our guest for the evening, Mr. Ninan, who doesn't require any introduction though, but certainly it would be a pleasure to listen to him and the experiences of all that's Kerala from him.
Thank you so very much, Mohit. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. And thanks for all those nice words you spoke about me. Uh, so that there's no confusion about this, let me explain to everybody that this is a gift that Mohit Gupta gave to me when I was in Delhi. It's called a gamcha. It's used widely in the north. It's a shawl that's used. And I'm wearing it because he gave it to me. And I'm wearing it. It's because this is a program that he supports. And he sort of, it's his idea actually. I just came in later when he sold the idea to me. Thank you so much, Mohit, for your introduction. And welcome everybody to another episode of All That's Kerala, a chat along the backwaters. This is, by the way, the 13th episode of this fortnightly program, which we have every 2 weeks, every Saturday in the evenings, normally at 8 o'clock. This program is fueled by city book leaders and the Kerala Museum. Kerala Museum is in, as all of you know, is in Edapalli, Kochi, and City Book Leaders is based in Delhi. And Mohit Gupta is its conceptualizer. It's everything. Now, All That's Kerala is a program that tries to introduce Kerala to the world, to India, and of course to people in Kerala itself. I must particularly thank Mohit Gupta for the conceptualization of the program and for seeing it through all these 13 episodes. I must also thank Aditi Nair. I think she is not here with us today, but Aditi Nair is the one who leads Kerala Museum, and she's the person who has been supporting us in matters of culture, of arts, of cinema, etc. So even though Aditi is not here, let me welcome her and thank her on my personal behalf. Today's episode. Now, once upon a time in India, newspapers was something that none of us could do without. It was like the morning cup of tea, morning cup of coffee. You had to have your morning newspaper, just as you must have had your coffee and tea. It was an addiction with all of us. And each of us had our very special selective brands of coffee and tea. And similarly, we had our selective brands of newspapers. Those in Chennai, those in the south had the Hindu as their addiction. Those in Mumbai and many parts of the north had the Times of India. And then, of course, if you were in Delhi, then it was the Hindustan Times. Mohit Gupta will bear me out. It was the Hindustan Times in Delhi. You had to read the Hindustan Times if you were in Delhi. And for those of us in Kerala, there was this unavoidable Malayalam Manorama. It doesn't matter whether you're a Marxist or a BJP or a congressman. You had to read the Malayalam Manorama every morning. That was something that it was standard. Political education in Kerala in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s happened largely through the reading of newspapers. Tea shops, where the village crowd gathered to have their morning tea. Somebody would read out a newspaper aloud, and the others would listening in, coming in with their comments, talking about the news that was being read about. Everybody had their comments. That is what newspapers meant to all of us. That's all changed now. The first challenge was TV. Initially, there was Doordarshan, which nobody really bothered about. And then the 24/7 news channels happened. You had news round the clock, even at midnight, at 1 o'clock, at 2 o'clock. And there was this constant breaking of news, breaking news. Happened every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And that started to replace the newspapers as the giver of news, as the purveyor of news. The newspaper could have survived the TV and the 24/7 social media and the 24/7 TV news reporting, but newspapers found it very difficult to survive the social media, where everybody became a reporter, everybody became a journalist, everybody became people who pervade news. Now, who wants to read a newspaper or even watch a TV when you can have breaking news on your phone every 5, 10, 15 seconds? Then came the online news portals, which came in with more analytical news. So that was a very bad negative for newspapers. But to top it all, last March, COVID happened, and along with that, the lockdown. With COVID and the lockdown, people were afraid even to touch newspapers because you thought, or maybe you're right, to touch the newspaper because you could get corona from it. So people stopped buying newspapers. The decline in newspaper readership was tremendous. In spite of that, I was a regular reader of newspapers. I used to read 5 newspapers right through COVID, right through the lockdown. But even so, I'm very sure, as a person who even regularly reads the newspapers today, that the newspaper that we hold in our hands will not survive very long, that it has become anachronistic, that it is going to die out soon. That is my feeling. But today, as our guest, we have a dissenter, one who believes and asserts very convincingly that the newspaper will not die. He believes that the newspaper will survive. And that person who says it is not somebody ordinary. He has been in the business of newspapers for over 3.5 decades now. He has spent a lifetime with the Times of India Group and intends to spend another lifetime with the Dinathanthi Group in Chennai. He is the CEO of DT Next. DT Next, NEXT, spelled out in capital letters, is the English language newspaper of the Dinathanthi Group published from Chennai. He is Sri Nainan Thariyan, an authority on the business of newspapers. Welcome, Sri Nainan Thariyan, to the 13th episode of All That's Kerala Chat Along the Backwaters.
Thank you.
I had always thought that 13th was very unlucky for me. But for All That's Kerala, for this, 13 is a very lucky number. We're lucky to have you as our guest, Mr. Nainan. Thank you for being with us. You proved to me that 13 is no longer unlucky. And before I start my chat with him and sort of put my first question to him, I'd like to tell all our viewers that he's here in his personal capacity. So none of the views he's going to express are going to be the views of either the Times of India or of the Dinathanthi Group of newspapers or of DT Next. With that caveat, let me start my conversation with Sri Nainan Thariyan. As I said, once upon a time in India, newspapers used to dominate the media. The media meant the newspapers, the newspapers meant the media. But today's newspapers are a ghost of their past glory. What has changed? Did the concept and the very definition of the media itself change? Did the industry not see this change coming? What happened that made this big difference? What is your response to the question why the past glory of the newspapers has changed so very much, Mr. Tharia?
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. Newspapers have seen a lot of turbulence even in the past. And whenever there is a new media vehicle which is coming to life, whether it was television or radio, people were in a hurry to write the obituary of newspapers. I remember when television was introduced in India, many people thought that's the end of radio. Today, similarly, people are talking about how theaters are going to have a natural death with OTT platform. But all of them will survive. Only thing is they need to find new ways of survival. Newspapers, as you rightly said in the introduction, that they were a sort of a chore product. It was a ritual. It's like doing your puja in the morning or having your coffee in the morning. Newspapers were a compulsory habit of people. Now, with many other options available, it is moving away from a chore segment to a leisure segment, at least among youngsters. Some of the youngsters don't even consume newspaper. It's a fact. But newspapers are not in the business of paper. They are in the business of news. So as long as news is relevant to people, newspapers can continue. They may have to modify their models.
No, thank you, Mr. Tharian, for that. It's a business, as you said. It's a business of news, not the business of paper, very rightly put. But it is business. And if it's a business, particularly in a business like newspapers, or for that matter, any business, no business can run without profits. Has the financing structure of newspapers been at fault that these profits should plummet so much when readership falls? Yeah, readership falls. There can be, but the business of newspapers has been such that its finances have become very dependent upon advertisers. What is your comment on that?
See, one of the uniqueness about newspapers in India is that our cover price is the lowest in the world. Even in Sri Lanka, our neighboring country, newspaper costs 30 Sri Lankan rupees. That is roughly about 15 rupees. In America, it's $2 to $3, whereas we are selling it at on an annual subscription basis, it comes to less than 2 rupees, sometimes even 1 rupee. This was a model which suited at that point in time. So a lot of newspapers, 80 to 90% of the revenue comes from advertising. So therefore, readers were subsidized by advertisers. So it was almost free. Why it wasn't given free, absolutely free, was that there is no ABC certification possible. Audit figures were not allowed. Therefore, there was a token amount which was charged on newspaper. That model has to change. This is one product where it is sold less than what it costs to make. How long can we make a product like that? So people should be prepared to pay a higher price for newspaper. And that will change the entire economics and profitability.
How much do you think is before you say that, I think a Sri Lankan rupee is twice the Indian rupee. So if it is so an Indian rupee would be about 1.5, 1.5 rupees. That's beside the point. But come to the question I'm coming to is, how much do you think a newspaper should be priced to make it reasonably profitable? The other question, as it is, the newspapers has no readership. If you're going to price it even higher, then even that will fall. So where do you make this balance?
There are two things here. One is um, the direct variable cost of a newspaper of, let's say, 20 pages or 24 pages will cost nothing less than 12 to 13 rupees. So at least people should be able to pay the cost of production for the cost of production. People are happily paying for internet. People are happily paying for television, OTT platforms. So what makes you think that people are not willing to pay for the newspaper? I think they are just used to low price. It was a comfort zone. Secondly, today advertisers are not looking at large numbers. They are looking more at ROI of their advertising spends. So gone are the days when you can offer millions and millions of readers. I think advertiser wants engagement of their readers so that they get better response to the advertisements.
And in India, there's something else which is very unique, which is that we need our newspaper hand delivered at home. We need to have the newspaper along with our tea. Hand delivery of newspaper is also expensive, isn't it? I don't
Yes.
think that happens in many of the Western countries. Is that true?
No, that's true. India, again, this has been a practice, and it is door delivered. Come to think of it, the kind of processes the one newspaper goes through. The reporters go and collect stories, the sub-editors put it together, and the editor goes through the story several times, verified. It's a lot of work, actually. It's a lot of work that goes into the credibility of the news that we report. Then you report in a certain manner that it's easily readable and it's engaging. With all this, we are selling a product at 1 or 2 rupees, which is quite unreasonable for the reader to expect. And that too, home delivered. But home delivery has been the practice in India. There is no other modality in India. The stand sales of newspapers are very low. It's mostly home delivered.
I'm not, you are originally a Times of India man, and I don't want to be critical. You don't want to answer to this if you don't want to. But this practice of selling a newspaper for 1 rupee started with the Times of India. I remember they're making a big news out of it, saying we're going to deliver newspapers at 1 rupee. So I think it started there, and the others had to copy. I mean, you've already commented on it, but do you have anything more to say that how do we go back on this practice now?
I think it suited, that particular strategy suited at that point in time when the newspapers were, our literacy rates were very low, and we were also trying to improve the numbers, and advertisers were also looking at larger number as one of the criteria for advertising rates. Today, all these things have changed. So one has to really look at the profitability of the newspaper, as you rightly said. So there, the unwanted numbers have no meaning to the publisher or to the advertiser. So raising the price, some may drop off. It doesn't really matter, because then you are giving the la creme reader to the advertiser.
I just want to tell our viewers that you're welcome to send in your questions. You can send in your questions on the Zoom group chat, and I'll pick them up and pose them to Sri Nainan, and he can answer them as he wishes. Now, coming back to advertising, when advertisers become the one that, it's a question of demand and supply. When a newspaper is so dependent on advertisers, then the advertisers start to dictate terms. I saw a very ridiculous thing this afternoon on TV. As you know, in Kerala, TVs are also dependent on advertising. They're much more dependent than even newspapers, I would say. I saw something very ridiculous on TV this afternoon. As you know, Jai Hind is the official TV of the Indian National Congress. And I saw this news, I don't remember the time, but it was this afternoon, where Jai Hind TV, its analysis and its newsreaders were being very critical of the left-front government in Kerala, particularly critical of Pinarayi Vijayan as the chief minister. And then they went for a commercial break. And the first advertisement on Jai Hind TV after this critical news about Pinarayi Vijayan was an advertisement by the government of Kerala where Pinarayi Vijayan was being praised to the skies. as though he was the answer to all the problems of Kerala, that everything the good that has happened in Kerala was because of him. It seems so odd that just a few seconds after the newsreader was roundly criticizing, the analyst was criticizing Pinarayi Vijayan, should come an advertisement, which many may not even know was an advertisement, which was praising him to the sky. So this is the what happens when you are so dependent on advertising. That sounded very pathetic to me. Let me move on. People today have become used to getting information for free. You get your newspaper almost free. You get your TV channels. You pay for it, but that was only recently. You get a lot of information on WhatsApp and other groups for free. You get a lot of online news portals, news channels for free, and some of them are very analytical too. I'll come to that later. So, should information not be free? How can newspapers impose a high readership cost on newspapers? Information is available free, so free news is like free air. Information is the air that supports democracy. So, shouldn't it be free, Mr. Naina?
I think the free can be an inducer to induce trial, but free can't be permanent. A lot of media companies have given a lot of things free for a limited period. Then after that, you have to pay directly or indirectly. You pay. Today, what's happening with WhatsApp? You're paying indirectly because you have privacy at stake. They are making money out of your contacts, your time. So you are directly or indirectly paying for every medium.
True, but they are not taking money directly out of your pocket. So there's a difference. It's when money goes out of your pocket that people feel unhappy.
When the credibility becomes the differentiator. When it comes to today's, I think newspapers offer the best credible news than any other medium. And that's the purpose of reading newspaper today. Because it's been verified several times over before it is printed. There is no hurry to report a news in a newspaper, whereas websites as well as television channels are always in competition against time.
That's very true. Let me just move on. TV. We spoke about it very briefly. I think that was what you were trying to say. That's what you pointed out. That the news continues. The platforms that provide the news will change. TV came as a big challenger to the newspapers. How much of a challenge is TV today to newspapers? 24/7 news, analysis, 8 o'clock, debates. How much are they challenged to newspapers? They have you riveted at times, don't they? Whereas the newspapers don't rivet you as much as a TV.
When television came in a big way in India, print was leading. It was almost having about 60% share of the advertising spends. Today, between TV and print, it's almost equal. In fact, in some cases, the television has overtaken print. But television is also going through the similar sort of a disruption because people are moving away from television to other forms. Today, be it any medium, you are in competition with 16 awake hours. 8 hours you sleep, 20 out of the 24 hours, you can be exposed to any medium, and that's your competition today. It's not television or it's any other sort of medium. It could be anything.
I stick to television. Television is driven by TRPs. And TRPs is what decides how much revenue you will get for your advertising. But we have seen the negative side of TRPs for many years, but recently we have seen it a great deal with what's happening with the Republic TV. How genuine are TRPs? If they're not genuine, how do we improve them?
Whether it is genuine or not, the real question is what alternative do we have? It's a sample. If it is done properly, I think TRPs make a lot of sense. That's the only way to measure the effectiveness of a particular television channel. The same thing goes with even newspaper for the readership surveys. We don't know the correctness, the accuracy of these studies. There could be some gaps. It's quite possible. But we expect all these things to be run by professionals, and integrity is taken for granted.
Right, but can integrity be taken for granted? How do you ensure that TV TRPs are? The technology has improved so fast, so much. If it is an online news or if it's an online portal, I know how many people are watching me. I know in a video that I put on YouTube how many people have watched my program. Can't that also not apply technology-wise to TRPs and TVs?
When it comes to measurement of any medium, um, there are doubts about these figures are reported correctly. This happens with radio. This happens with the print and television, and even on the on online platforms also. This is a big dispute.
I don't know whether there's something wrong with my Zoom chat. Normally, I should have got a few questions by now. I don't see any. I don't know if it is. I see a question from Nirmala Lily. Digital media is not agronomically. That's disappeared. I think there's something wrong with my thing. Lily, if you are there, Nirmala, would you like to articulate your question? Is that possible? I don't see them typed out on my.
He's on mute.
Let me work this out. Just a second.
Well, I'll continue. Is there a problem?
I think some other computer is on.
Yeah, that's better. Right, I think that was a technical hitch.
My question is, digital media is not ergonomically friendly. In this context, how do you ensure the sustainability?
That's Dr. Nirmala Lily. Thank you so much, Nirmala. Can you answer that question?
Can you repeat?
Yeah, see, the digital media, it's not ergonomically friendly. You know, every time you are just sitting in front of a laptop and reading. And in this context, how do you ensure the sustainability in digital media? That's my question.
Yeah, the attention span of the digital media is a problem because people are unable to read it over a period of time. Secondly, there are too many interruptions and disruptions because of advertisements, intrusive advertisements. But that's the way it works. So, and that's one of the reasons why I feel that print medium has a better future because it's very engaging. And when you spend time with the newspaper, you are fully with it. For instance, if you are watching a television, you can do multitasking. You need not be watching the television, but you can be engaged in some other activity. So television is an active medium with a passive audience, whereas newspaper is a passive medium but active audience.
Thank you. That's well put. I'll talk about the neutrality of a news medium. Newspapers, except for political party newspapers like Deshabhimani or Veechanam, I'm speaking of Malayalam newspapers, they try to be, newspaper normally tries to be neutral. They present both sides of the question. Even if newspapers have a political slant, they try not to show it too much. They analyze both sides of an issue. And then, of course, at the end, they say, this is our view. But TV debates these days are extremely one-sided. They are very clear about where their views are, and the people who oppose them are shouted down. Neutrality has taken a beating because of these very biased TV news channels, which pretend to be neutral. The primary principle that both sides of an issue should be explained has been hit out for a six. One-sided reporting in TV channels have become commonplace. Now, will newspapers also go that same way in the future? For want of if they want a partisan readership for themselves.
The reader is expecting a views paper than a newspaper. News is can be pretty boring, but people expect views out of the editoriality. But when you express the views, it has to be balanced. It is pro, against, and the view of the paper. As long as the newspapers are able to balance this, then it doesn't affect the credibility. What happens very often on television is that the intent of the anchor is very clear. The anchor seems to be siding a particular section. That's where people lose credibility of the channel and the discussion.
I believe the technical hitch I had, I was not able to read the questions that were typed earlier, has been solved. So if you would like to type in your questions, you're most welcome. While I continue with my discussion with Mr. Narayan. Now I'll come to social media. We looked at newspapers on its own. We looked at TV and newspapers. Let me look at social media. We brought social media in edgeways earlier, but let me go full focus on that. Social media is the biggest threat to newspapers today. How would you analyze social media in terms of as a threat to newspapers? How much of a threat is it to newspapers?
In terms of time, it's a threat, not in terms of content. In terms of time, because like I said, out of the 16 awake hours, you probably spend a lot of time on social media today. And that can, to a large extent, affect the reading of the newspaper. But when it comes to the correctness of and credibility of the reports, people depend on the newspaper rather than social media.
You mean there's a lot of fake news around, which people have begun to realize is fake? That's a very valid point. I think my technical hitch has been solved. I get two questions. The first one is from Ashwin, who says, how do you think, Mr. Nayanar, that we can bring back the youth who are no longer reading newspapers into the habit of reading newspapers? What can newspaper companies do on their part to get the young to read newspapers? The young are not interested in newspapers. Just as they're not interested in tea and coffee, they've gone to other drinks. They're not interested in newspapers either. How do we bring them back?
We have to get them through the online route, not necessarily on the newspaper, physical newspaper. They are not averse to news. They are probably averse to the platform. They are so used to technology that they end up using technology. I don't think there is anything against newspaper. Secondly, that the content, some of them may find it boring, some of them may find it uninteresting. So we have to make the content a lot more utility oriented. It should talk probably about how to build your career, what are the options for your education, and talk about adventure sports, talk about technology, talk about gadgets. So some of the newspapers have supplements to attract the younger audiences, and they have proved to be successful. And I would say Times of India has done a fairly good job in attracting the younger audiences. So it's a matter of how you give it to them.
Very true. I think, supplements like Kochi News, Delhi News, Kochi Times, Delhi Times, which Times of India pioneered, have brought in a lot of the young. It's full of glamorous actresses and actors and TV and cricketers. But I think Srinivas Raghavan sent me a private message saying something what you just said, Mr. Nayanar. He says, what I feel is that people will always seek news, but not in a printed newspaper, as millennials go for the digital. So we have to think in terms of that. There's a question from Sheba Mold Sarjan. Reading newspapers have a health-wise advantage for people, particularly students, with respect to increasing the span of attention, vision, eyes, a whole lot more. Why is this point not being highlighted? I think you highlighted it just now. Would you like to add to it, or can I move on?
No, that is certainly one advantage of reading a newspaper, but this is something which even the schools have a role to play. Times of India has done a very interesting program called NIE, which they pioneered in India, and many newspapers have followed that pattern. It's called newspaper in education, where the teacher reads out the newspaper to the students in the school, and thereby, creating a habit of reading the newspaper. So this is something, it's a habit. If I remember we started reading the newspaper at a very young age, and there wasn't anything else at that point in time. And the newspapers, we wait for the newspapers in the morning. That's the only way to get to know what's happening around the world at that point in time. Today, with various platforms that is available on a real-time basis, people are not reading newspaper in certain quarters.
Thank you. Coming back to social media is full of fake news. We spoke about it very briefly. Is it possible to distinguish for a reader fake news from a real one? What are the flags, the red flags that someone like an ordinary young person or a person like me should watch out for to distinguish a fake news in social media from something that is real and actual? Are there such?
There are sites which allows you to check whether the reported news is correct or not, and it's pretty much perfected now. So many people, I depend on that, and I get a very good insight into the reports, whether it is fake or not.
You said earlier that the credibility of news has been compromised because of all the 24/7, social media posts which are fake news. How do you ensure that? Is it possible to ensure at all that the social media becomes a responsible medium of getting news across?
Social media is very powerful. In fact, the newspapers themselves use social media to gain readership and also to push news. I think it is how you use it. There are a section of people in the society which tend to use the social media in a negative manner. Otherwise, I would say that it's a very, very powerful medium, and it is here to stay. And it's very popular among the youth. So, they will coexist with the traditional medium. Today, the reader is also a prosumer. He is producing and consuming. Whereas newspaper is produced by someone, you don't have a role in the newspaper except for the letters to the editor. So whereas in social media, you are part of the content.
That's very well put. You're both a producer of news as well as a reader of the news, consumer of the news. But the social media provides actually what the consumer wants. He wants news quickly. He wants news in width, not in depth. Whereas a newspaper provides news in depth and not in width, as you told me yesterday. So it's something that the consumer wants, is it not? So how do you respond to that?
Yes. Like I said, social media is a matter of choice. It's not something which you can avoid. Only because it's not as credible, we can't discard social media. Social media has several advantages, and one has to look at those advantages as well.
How do you revive newspapers? I have a suggestion. I don't know whether you will agree with me. In the morning, everybody is busy. A person like me, when I was working, it was very difficult. But now I have more time. But the youngsters are very busy in the morning. They're getting up, they're having their coffee, tea, or whatever, having their breakfast, and rushing out for their work. Do you think, instead of having newspapers being printed and brought to you in the morning, if newspapers could be printed and brought in the evening with the day's news? It is during the daytime that news is generated. And if a person can read it while he's on the metro, returning back from work or back home, relaxing, the day's work is over, he's switched off his office, isn't that the best time to produce newspapers tomorrow? Evening newspapers rather than morning newspapers, which you can sit and read in the evenings at 5, 6, 7 p.m. and you have the whole day's news before you.
There are two observations here. Point number one is evening newspapers have failed. Evening newspapers were the first one to get folded up. Secondly, in the evening, people get more busy these days. they have either they go to the gym or they go for a party and things like that. So evenings are a lot more, packed. The third reason is that the news breaks are happening till about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. So you are able to, when you get up in the morning, you get the newspaper, you are able to read the newspaper with some of the news that is not known to you. Whereas during the afternoon, you already know what was happening. So evening newspapers are worked only in cities where there is commuting. So in Bombay, for instance, it has worked out. But in Bangalore, it didn't work out. So you need a long commuting, requirement for newspapers to survive in the evening.
When you say evening newspapers have failed, are you really saying they failed recently, or talking of past? Like the Madras Mail was an evening newspaper, and it's failed, of course.
There isn't a successful evening paper in India now.
Sorry, come again?
I said there is no evening newspaper that is successful and running today.
Right. Okay.
Making decent profit.
So that is not a way forward? Yeah, you put a very valid point that people are sleeping at night and news is happening and you read it in the morning. That's very well said. But you really think evening newspapers do not have a chance against the digital media?
No, I don't think
right.
So.
I've got a few comments and questions. Srikumar Raghavan says that I feel newspapers have to change with the times. And what he means is that it should improve the analytical content, which you spoke about, and maybe using artificial intelligence, data science, and good infographics. Obviously, one cannot argue with that, so I'm not going to put it to you as a question. There's a question from Joseph. He says, any news which is very sensational when it erupts, then goes into hibernation after its initial hype. No follow-up are seen in media anymore, though readers may be interested to know what the current status is. Is that true today? Or I see sometimes TV news channels bringing up news that is, 3 months old, 4 months old, and saying and bringing it up. So is this correct or not?
When news stories break, the old stories are pushed back. I mean, this happens naturally. There is no intent to. If you recall, some of the cases have been brought up. It's the best example in Kerala is the nun who was I forget her name. Who was supposedly murdered.
Abhaya, Sister Abhaya, yeah.
Abhaya's sister. So that came up after several years, and media has been writing about that particular case for so many years, and it got livened also because of the media's intervention. So that's not always true that you forget about something which you write about today and tomorrow.
There's a question from Anisha. She's, I think, based in Houston. She says, thank you both for your insightful session. Thank you so much. Her question is around digital subscription to newspapers versus print subscriptions. In 2020, she says, we heard that for the first time, New York Times digital subscriptions subscription revenue exceeded print revenues.
That's right.
With India overtaking the US as the largest smartphone market. Do you foresee a future where subscriptions are 100% digital and not print? Is that a possibility?
I think there is a good possibility of, if not 100%, the large portion of your subscription revenue coming out of digital route. Already New York Times is doing it, Wall Street Journal is doing it, many other newspapers have been able to do that. In India, there is some resistance to pay for content. I don't know whether it is also because of our legacy of giving newspaper very cheap. Content comes at a premium, but somehow we are not willing to pay for it. And that it's a change of habit, which I'm sure will happen.
The newspaper industry, if I may say, is panicking. Profits are under pressure. And how has COVID impacted on this already miserable situation? COVID came and the newspapers has really panicked with COVID. What do you say? How has COVID impacted? on readership of print?
COVID was a big disruptor, and COVID has affected both circulation and advertising revenue. Circulation of newspapers have seen up to 40% fall, decline, and advertising revenue also have come down to 40 to 50% during the peak pandemic period. Now this is the revival time. Slowly, newspapers have started doing better.
I'll come back to my earlier question, which somebody pointed out. How do you encourage the youth? You mentioned, you answered it briefly, but I think that is the future, because youth in India particularly constitute a very large proportion of the total population, below 40% or 40% or so, I believe. So how do you promote readership of newspapers among the young? You mentioned it, but I think it needs going back.
Newspapers should be positioned as a physical paper which is read in the morning, and throughout the day one should be able to engage with the newspaper on its online edition. I think that's where the youth readership will come in. They are technology friendly, and they also like to know on a real-time basis what's happening. If a newspaper reports a cricket score, now today's score I can report tomorrow morning, which is too late, but I want to know what's happened to the match today. So if I have a good website, my online edition should be able to provide them what they need 24 hours. With that, I think the youth readership will come back to the print companies.
And the young sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, and the newspapers are the ideal platform to run online newspapers as well, because they have the infrastructure, they have the legacy, they have the experience, and they know how to treat the news, though the treatment is different. So I think it should be an extension of the print product to online. It should be a seamless reading pattern.
We spoke about the newspapers in India and the young not reading it. What is the scene in the US, if I may ask? Would you know? What is the scene in Europe? Are the young reading newspapers there, or is it the same case as here in India?
Both Europe and US, apart from the youth, even the adults have stopped reading newspapers to a large extent. There is a huge drop in circulation of newspapers as well as the magazines and any print product for that matter. So the drop is a lot more sharper in the US and Europe.
The drop is sharper. What about Europe? What about
Europe is also a similar pattern. I think India and certain countries in Asia are the only part of the world where print is still sort of growing. As per the last readership survey, Indian newspapers are growing. We are getting more readers year on year. Language newspapers are growing faster than English newspapers in our country. So this is it's very different from the rest of the world. Our trend is very different, and
sorry, continue.
And also that there is scope for higher literacy rate also. So that will also push up the number of readers in India.
We've been speaking generally so far about India. Let me come to Kerala specifically. What do you see is the future of newspapers in Kerala? Malayalam Manorama has already seen a drop in its circulation. So have the other newspapers. What is the future of Malayalam newspapers?
I don't think it's much different from the rest of India, except that in Kerala there is 100% literacy, which is an opportunity rather than a threat. But the formula of newspapers also offering online edition is
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello.
We can hear you, sir.
Are we hearing Mr. Thariye?
No, sir. I think
We lost him.
he's logged out. I think he should come in a while.
Right.
It's already 8:53.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe I think I'll just put across a question that Ram has sent to me. Do you see the possibility? Ram is from Impresario Events. Do you see a possibility that print will be converted to features only and news, especially to break in the category? Especially the break in category will be with news portals. I think we should wait for him to answer this. Similarly, I think there's a remark from Navya. It's such a pleasure watching this interaction. My 2-bit. Newspapers have to adapt to the times, and digital is inevitable. I believe the old and new platforms will coexist. Content is always king. Right. Do we wait for Tadian to come back, or
Would you like to call him once and check?
Right. Do you have his?
Yeah. Then let me call him. Just
Yeah,
a second.
please.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there is a comment from Joseph where he says all the newspapers are nowadays releasing full-page advertisements, not one page, but many pages. And advertisements occupy maximum space. He says any person, any common man, if he thinks why should he subscribe and pay a higher, newspaper cost for reading an advertisement, we cannot find fault with it. I think that's very true. I've also seen, you see these advertisements which occupy 2, 3, 4 pages, and one has to wade through pages of newspapers to come to the news. So this question of paying money to read somebody else's advertisement for which the advertiser has already paid is an issue that is before us. And there's also from Ashwin, where Ashwin says advertisement revenue are essential to sustain newspaper. But nowadays, when you take a newspaper, main news pages are filled with advertisements. Again, the same point. So is it possible that we can get rid of advertisement from main pages and produce a supplement itself for the advertisement? That is also something that can be considered. We'll wait for Mr. Tharian to come in. I hope he'll be able to join us.
Yeah, he called me and he mentioned that he should join in again. It's just that seems.
Right. And let's wait for him, and I'll put these questions to him, especially the question from about advertising taking so much space that what is the point in paying for a newspaper if you're really going to pay to read someone else's advertisement, which you're not interested in reading in any case. That's what I think. I think we could put across to him. Meanwhile, if there are any questions, we are also running short of time. We are already at 8:56, only about 4 or 5 minutes more. But if anyone would like to come in with comments or questions till Tadian joins us, you're most welcome. Dr. Nirmala, you are on the screen. Would you like to add something? I can see your bright smile.
Thank you. And I was just thinking, sir, nowadays the TV channel, especially 24/7, you get the night news as tomorrow's news tonight. So we are already getting all the news of the next day. So when you get the newspaper in your hand, it is already a stale news. So that is one of the reasons that you lose interest in reading newspaper. So is there any way that we can curtail this? That is my question.
Well, it's something which I think. What is your answer to it? It's something I'll put across to our viewers. Can somebody answer? I'm not an expert in newspapers. I just read them. So I don't know if somebody else would like to try and answer it. Navya adds that it is only because of advertising revenues that newspapers come and subsidize to the reader. So she points it out as a part of this debate whether we should have so many advertisements or not. She would say that advertisers are essential because that's how we get a subsidized newspaper. Point is well taken. Will anybody like to? Will you try to answer that question yourself, Nirmala? What is your viewpoint on it?
I think the viewpoint is the 24/7 will not come. I mean, should not bring the news of tomorrow for tonight, so that there will be some eagerness or inquisitiveness we have got to see read the newspaper. So this is when you stay back late night and you tend to watch the news, therefore no suspense.
Very true. Meanwhile, I've got a message from Rainan Tharian saying he's unable to connect,
Yeah.
which is very sad, because I think we have gone into a lot of depth on this issue. While Dr. Shiba Mold Sargent points out that even social media, there are advertisements which one cannot skip. And we are in 9 o'clock. We are already at 8:58. So I think perhaps we'll wind up this. It's been a very informative session. If anybody has any last points, I'm always willing to take it. But Dr. Nainan is unable to connect, and I don't think he will be able to connect in the next few minutes. So if somebody has a question, I'll give the floor or I'll give the screen to them. But otherwise, there's somebody in the waiting room. Otherwise, I think we will have to regrettably say goodbye to Sri Nainan Tharian in his absence. Technology is wonderful, digital is wonderful, but here comes all those, drawbacks of the digital world. Once you have a newspaper in your hand, you can read it. Here is something that shows you that even today, the digital is not so foolproof as we think it is. So I'll come back to what we started with. That is Nainan Tharian saying that newspapers will not die. That was a very firm statement that he made. And certainly, I think we will end with that. Newspapers will not die. Maybe it will take other forms. Maybe it will not be the print media all the time, printed newspaper all the time. It will be a digital media. But newspapers will not die. It will come out in another form. It's like, a new incarnation, a new avatar of the newspaper. But newspaper and certainly news will not die. With those words, I'll hand over the floor to Mohit Gupta of City Book Leaders and ask him to say a concluding few words and thank Mr. Nainan and all the others who have contributed to these rich discussions we have had today.
Oh, for sure. So thank you very much. Definitely, it was very, very rich. And though this technical snag happened at the last, this also sets the context that digital definitely can't take over the print. You will have to read. So possibly if we are making a report of it and if you put it into paper, it will always be preserved. So digital definitely has its own place, but paper has its fine quality, and who better than a reading promotion organization like ours, which loves to promote people should read, not just on Kindle, but should flip more pages. Not the online pages, definitely, but pick up a book. And of course, if you have not read Mr. Joseph's book, do pick it up so that you can know what has happened in Cambodia. And possibly in one of the sessions, he will talk about his own book, which he usually shy away talking about his book, which is one of the best books I have read on Cambodia, which is a fiction, a non-fiction, a combination of it, but it's a masterpiece. To the author amongst us, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Sir, would you like to show your book?
Yes, since you mentioned it, I was not expecting you to mention it, but since you mentioned it, I don't know whether you can see it. This is my book, for those who have not read it, My Driver Too Long, and Other Tall Tales from a Post-Pol Pot Cambodia. Not intended to show it, but since you mentioned it, here it is,
Yes,
for those who would like to read it.
That's what we were talking about reading.
Oh yeah, of course.
I think your book is like a compendium of all the history of Cambodia, the food, the culture, the entire heritage of Cambodia. So with this, from Cambodia, we come back to our All That's Kerala, and would love to have everyone for the next sessions to come in. Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph, and to everyone who could join in today. It's truly a pleasure to have you all here. Have a good evening, and in fact, I see one of my course mates, Meena ji, part of it. We are learning Sanskrit together. So in that class, we say Punar Darshanaya rather than saying see you. Just to preserve our culture, we say Punar Darshanaya. So, ladies and gentlemen, Punar Darshanaya.
And in Malayalam, Veendum Kana. Thank you so much.
I learned
It's been a
it so
pleasure.
much.
Thanks everybody for watching, and thanks for the questions. Thank you so much. Goodbye and good.